course, I'm talking Anthony Treash of Pro Football Focus. Anthony, what's going on, man? Appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you for having me back on. I don't know why I'm zoomed in so much. As you remember last week, computer crashed on me. Had to get a new one, so I had to download Chrome real quick.
Had to get a new one. Okay.
I did. So
It's
been
all
a
good, man.
busy week.
I like having you front and center there, my guy. It's whatever works. It's we thankfully are. There we go. There he is. Our the streaming platform, my end, is crazy there for a couple of weeks. The Melon platform, whatever, which is a branch of Streamlabs. That's neither here nor there, but was going crazy. It just shows technology is great until it isn't. Whatever. We're a one-man show here. We just make it rock either way. Anyways, I appreciate you taking the time, my friend. It's funny. I was thinking in my head, I was like, this might be the shortest conversation Anthony and I will have in his weekly appearances, because after you get drubbed 48-7, I just don't really know what there is to say. You look at that game. I guess I'll ask you before we dive into the numbers and the grades and all that stuff. How surprised were you, if surprised at all, at just how lopsided it was? Because, I picked 41-10, but I thought it might be like 17-7 at half, and kind of one of those games where, just Georgia over time just sort of wore down the Gamecocks, and, South Carolina gave their best effort. But Anthony, from the opening snap, that game was never competitive. 24-0 at halftime. It got to 38-0. It got to 48-0. The only reason South Carolina scores is because the Dogs, I think, literally put their scout team in there, right? I thought Kirby Smart himself was playing defensive back. Just talk about, again, that game, and were you surprised at all? And how impressed, I guess, were you with Georgia as well?
Yeah, I can't say that I'm surprised they got beat, handedly, but I am a little surprised that there was just nothing there. We had the throw from out there at the beginning of the game to Jaheim Bell. It was a beautiful big-time throw, but after that, it was nothing, right? We just didn't see anything. And it was really every single facet from South Carolina that just performed poorly. And I think that's on the players and the coaches. It was just an all-around disaster. So I think I was just a tad surprised that it was as bad as it was, because I really do think it was probably a worst-case scenario game from start to finish, like you're kind of outlining. And I think from a Georgia perspective, I've been shocked from the get-go, just like all of these young, inexperienced players. Highly regarded recruits, but still, they look like they're super seniors out there with how refined they are, right? You just don't see that from a typical or defense anywhere in college football, and that's a testament to the coaching stuff that they have there. So, I think it's a little bit of both. I think Georgia's probably better than everybody thought, and I think everybody was pretty high on Georgia entering the year, of course, after winning the national title. But they're not skipping a beat after seeing all their talent go to the NFL level. And then from a South Carolina perspective, again, it was worst case scenario. They got a lot to clean up. I've been talking the last couple of, through the first two games, just some of their issues, and it's not time to, press the panic button yet. But I think, after something like this, we're getting closer and closer. And I think, this week they should take care of business against an underwhelming Charlotte team has major holes on both sides of the ball. But, if they struggle just even a little bit, then I think that's when you press it. This is a game where you need to go out there and you need to handle business by a considerable margin and control it from start to finish.
Sticking with Georgia, Anthony, because I feel like, we look at that game and trying to really just take all my biases out of it. You really do, like you mentioned, you've got to tip the cap to Georgia and give them credit. They have been, I think everybody knew how talented they were, right? They're preseason top 3 team, top 2 team, whatever. But when you lose the generational players that they lost on the defensive side and just had to reload at all those different positions, you thought, it's how can they not take a step back? And we still got a long way to go, and the competition for them will obviously stiffen up. Again, taking all biases out, and Gamecock fans may not like to hear it, but they haven't really been tested at this point by anybody that's even remotely near their level. So maybe, there will be some chinks in the armor that are shown. But again, you look at them, like you mentioned, man, top to bottom, offensively, Stetson Bennett is playing, I think, better than any quarterback in the country right now. And you can say he's a system quarterback, but damn it, he operates their system, I think, probably better than anybody could. Brock Bowers is probably the best tight end I've ever seen. And then defensively, like you mentioned, they just reloaded. Talk about, I guess, from the PFF side of things, top grades. I'd have to imagine Brock Bowers' grade this week is just like off the charts.
Oh, yeah. It was one of the best performances that we've really seen from a tight end over the last few years. He was our offensive player of the week here at PFF nationwide. He's always, we had him as the number one tight end in college football entering the season. I mean, last year he was arguably the best tight end in college football, and he was a true freshman, right? I mean, just what he is just kind of that full package of the modern day tight end with what they can do with him. And Todd Monken's scheming him very, very well, right? I mean, I think it's a combination of both. Just kind of utilizing his skill set. I mean, just the play when he was running down the street, the seam, open field, makes a couple guys miss. It's a 78-yard touchdown. I mean, that very few tight ends, if any, can do that other than Brock Bowers at the collegiate level. I mean, he does have pretty much checks every single box there. He's not very much an inline blocker, but with what he can do from a receiving perspective, he can create some real mismatches there. So, I mean, he genuinely is one of the best players, regardless of position in college football. I mentioned Todd Monken just a minute ago. I mean, I do think that he's probably one of the more underappreciated play callers in the country. Just kind of setting his guys up for success. And Stetson Bennett, like you said, he is a little limited, sure, but he's operating the system the way it was designed. He's not making mistakes. He's not putting the ball in harm's way. And he's getting the ball to his playmakers, right? That's the way the offense is designed. And he is carrying it out like that, right? I still think, again, if for some reason like Georgia does face a game where maybe things aren't going their way, Stetson Bennett's going to have to do something, then I think it'll get interesting. It could present some issues, but at this point, it's hard to pick a team that's going to really do that until the SEC championship game for the Dogs there. So, I mean, it's the perfect marriage, perfect blend for everybody offensively, defensively. I mean, like I said, you just have these young players really stepping up. Dumas Johnson, an off-ball linebacker, he was a breakout candidate for us entering the year. I mean, he's been carrying that out, with flying colors, right? I mean, he's really been one of the better off-ball linebackers in the SEC. Malachi Starks, the defensive back, true freshman. I mean, nobody's perfect, but I mean, he's been pretty dang good, all things considered, considering the experience and age and the position he's playing. I mean, it's everything there. I mean, they have the pieces that they needed to replace some of the talent that did leave there. So, I think, again, from a Georgia perspective, it kind of solidified them this game, in my opinion, as they are for real. They still are one of the best, if not the best team in college football. And, I think it's a good point that you did mention, with South Carolina not really facing somebody like on their same tier, because they really haven't, right? It's just 2 out of the first 3 games were just really bad mismatches there for them there. So, it was a tough one. And, from a PFF grading perspective, kind of going back full circle, is Brock Bowers. I mean, he was kind of the star of the show for both teams there. One of the higher graded players of the week. And then I mentioned Dumas Johnson. He was definitely up there as well defensively. Just an all-around performance, really. There was really nobody, I think, from my perspective on Georgia, where I was like, they didn't play, up to snuff, right? They struggled.
Yeah. Now, Anthony, everybody wants to talk offense, so let's start on the defensive side for South Carolina. A guy I want to highlight, because we've spent so much of the time, your appearances, and really just with everybody, of course, talking Spencer Rattler, the offensive line, Jaheim Bell, those issues, Marcus Satterfield. I want to highlight Nick Emmanwori. I think he's actually leading the country right now in solo tackles, had 14 solo tackles against Georgia, which I thought was crazy. And as a true freshman, I mean, he has stood on that defense. Just talk about his game, how he grades. Again, it was an abysmal performance for the Gamecocks defense, and Georgia did to South Carolina's defense what they're probably going to do to a lot of people. And like you mentioned, we knew it was a mismatch. But I do want to just take a moment to highlight Nick Emmanwori and his fantastic play, because he really has been a bright spot on Clayton White's squad at this point.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, he is one of their higher graded players. And, for a team, it's funny because, like, you could point out probably 3 or 4 players where it's like, this guy's the one to look out, that he's going to surprise some people. He could break out. Nick Emmanwori was not one of them at all whatsoever, right? And here he is. I think he is the highest graded player on their defense, if you kind of take into the snaps there. But just, I never like to look at tackle numbers purely just to, judge performance at the position. Sometimes they can be misleading, but in this case, I mean, it's exactly who he is. I mean, the dude's flying to the ball. He has a nose for the football. And the thing is like most of these guys that, are in his situation, you typically see some pretty ugly misses, some bad angles, right? The form needs some work. They're not polished off, but I mean, it's been borderline perfect with just a handful of misses there so far this season. That's definitely, I would say, one positive to take away from what we've seen so far from South Carolina. Definitely the bright spot if you want to take into the entire team so far this season.
For sure. Now, moving to Anthony, of course, the offensive side. I mean, we got to discuss it, man. Again, Spencer Rattler, just yet another underwhelming day for that entire offensive performance. But I want to ask you this because I just had Michael Bratton of that SEC podcast on, and he points to continuous offensive line issues and pass protection issues, and that being a problem. I talked to Stephen Garcia, who played quarterback at South Carolina. He points more toward it's more so on Spencer Rattler, or it more so should be on Spencer Rattler. I tend to think it's a mix of both. When you look at the Gamecocks offense, do you feel like, I mean, Spencer Rattler is obviously not playing his best. Is he getting the most amount of help he could be getting? Is he getting the best possible protection? No, but it's a broken offense right now. Bottom line, there's just no other way to put it. Like, no matter who you want to blame, it's a broken offense. When you look at this Gamecocks offense, what do you see?
Exactly that. You took the words out of my mouth. Broken. I mean, I think it's a combination of everything. I really don't think there's one singular aspect where you point to and say this is the reason why everything's falling apart. I think I think everybody's kind of to shoulder the blame, and I think too the play calling is part of that. With the offensive line in particular, I mean, it's hard to survive at the SEC level or really anywhere. It doesn't matter if you're playing in the Conference USA. If you're under pressure over 40% of your dropbacks, like Spencer Rattler is, you're going to have some problems, right? And I think what's been interesting, and I think we hit on this last week, and I've seen it earlier this week too. I think you might have tweeted it out about just kind of the coaching staff trying to get Spencer to focus on staying in the pocket, climbing, keeping his eyes downfield. I think it's kind of presenting some issues for him because his game before was all right. First read's not there. I'm going outside the pocket. We're going to play schoolyard football. Or I'm under pressure. And sometimes it would often lead, and I think this is why they're trying to correct it, is that sometimes it'd be too quick, right? He would just abandon clean pockets when he didn't have to, make things a little bit more difficult. But that's the way he played the game. Now you can kind of see him sometimes where he's very hesitant, right? He doesn't want to kind of move around. He wants to stay in the pocket when he's under pressure. And that's when we've seen some of those really, really bad throws from him. So I think it's kind of just a little bit of Spencer Rattler adjusting to a new style and trying to play another game that's not necessarily his. But again, the offensive line overall has been performing poorly, both from a pass protection and run blocking perspective. I mean, again, like I said, over 40% of Rattler's dropbacks under pressure. It's hard to live that way. The run game, I think it's like under a half a yard before contact per attempt. It's lowest in the SEC by almost half a yard. That's on both, I think, the offensive line and the running backs. I mean, you could point to multiple plays early on in that Georgia game where it's just it really at the both collegiate and the NFL levels, it takes one guy in the run game, right? One guy to mess up, the play's dead. And you could see that against Georgia. There were a handful of plays early on where it was one guy and it blew everything up. And if that guy made his block, he did his job. He's shooting the gap, and it's going to be a pretty long run there. So, I mean, I think it's a combination of everything and the play calling too. I think, I talked about it last week. I want to see a little bit more creativity because when you have guys with lesser talent, you need to be a little bit more creative, right? Especially against an elite team like Georgia. We saw kind of a little bit of that, but not really, not enough in my opinion. And the stat that really kind of, I think, sums everything up is if you look at their scripted plays. So like those are the first 15 plays generally, play callers, they know what they're going to go. They know the order. They know that's how they're going to start the game out. South Carolina, it's been really, really bad. I mean, they're the most inefficient offense in the SEC by a country mile on those scripted plays. I mean, their success rate, I think, is around 36%. The next lowest is like 40%. I mean, it's quite bad in that regard. So, I mean, I think and of course, at the receiver room, not 100%, right? That plays into it. So I think it's just a combination of everything. And still, even too, I think Spencer's just kind of, maybe there's just a lack of trust in some guys. Maybe they don't have that established relationship with all of the receivers. So I think it's just everything, right? I don't think there's one piece that's really performing above, saying, well, they're doing their job, everybody else isn't. I think you can kind of shoulder the blame on everybody. But, you also have to take into account that I think the first game, it was rough. The last two games, they were very difficult tests, right? For a new group all these new talents. I mean, think about it, right? You have a new quarterback, new receivers, new tight end, new backfield. I mean, you have new pieces everywhere, right? And I think this is what we're seeing in college football in some cases where, it's hard to get all these guys on the same page and the same scheme. It's a new system. We've seen some of the guys actually talk about that. And, when you play a team like Arkansas and Georgia 2 out of the first 3 weeks, it's going to be really tough. Now, if they had a start where it's like Michigan, for example, they had, Hawaii, Colorado State, and UConn. If South Carolina had that start, we'd probably be talking about a completely different South Carolina team where it's like, okay, maybe they get some confidence in them. But I think it was just kind of a bad timing with the schedule with this new group. It's hard to kind of adjust to that and kind of get up to speed there. So that's where I look at this weekend and it's like, okay, I mean, they have an opportunity ahead of them, right? This is your time to kind of piece everything together, get some confidence in the group, and show that you have the pieces to be a potent offense that I was expecting and everybody else was expecting there. So I think it's a very interesting time for South Carolina. I think it's a unique one. That's where I'm not, completely pressing the panic button yet. Again, it's still a new system, but I think this is the game that's gonna, it's hard saying like, okay, the Charlotte game is gonna, make or break the season. But I think to a certain extent, I think it kind of defined a lot of it, right? Just from a on the field and off the field perspective, because let's say it's a little bit closer. Maybe they only win by a couple touchdowns and some flukiness goes their way. Maybe it's kind of like Georgia State and the offense is a little sluggish sometimes. They're not going to feel too confident, I think, heading into SEC play, right? And they're still going to have everybody down their throats like they are right now. So I think it's, like I said, a very interesting time there. And, kind of going back up to the top, it's not just one person. I think it's kind of a collective group there. But I mean, again, we've talked ad nauseum about the talent that they have. They have the capability of turning it around. It's just, can they do it? Well, we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing, Anthony, is South Carolina is where everybody picked them to be at this point, 1-2. And you mentioned the competition. I think it's just how it has happened is really what's tough to stomach, and the uncompetitiveness and the offense looking so abysmal. I agree with you. This is a huge opportunity this weekend against Charlotte to build some momentum, build some confidence, because really what it's about, Anthony, the next 2 weeks, using both those games, Charlotte and SC State, and then gearing yourself up for that pivotal matchup on the road in Lexington against Kentucky, which I think will really set the tone for the rest of the season, the second half of your season. If you're going to even remotely overachieve or, even make a bowl game, I think this season, that's one that is going to be pivotal to your year for sure. Before we get off of Georgia and move into that Charlotte game more so, Anthony, you mentioned the scripted plays, and that takes me to play calling, and that takes me to scheme. And Marcus Satterfield's a guy right now, when your offense isn't working, the OC is going to catch a lot of heat, but especially when last year you finish outside the top 100 in offense. And I think what's tough, Anthony, for fans to comprehend, and I don't blame them, right, is you were what you were in offense last year, but you won 6 games in the regular season, 7 with the bowl win, with 4 different quarterbacks starting a game and all the moving pieces in year one. And then you add all these guys, and fans don't want to hear, well, give credit to this team, give credit to that team. It's this tough test. It's this blah, 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 blah. They just don't want to hear it, right? So, you add Spencer Rattler, all these pieces, and a lot of the fan base, honestly, Anthony, has checked out on Marcus Satterfield. A lot of the fan base, and I'm reserving judgment. Really, for me, it's that Kentucky game. That's where it's sort of all going to kind of come to a head. It's like, if you don't have it figured out by then, and we lost Anthony there. Let's get him back in. You're
All
back.
right.
Good deal. No, you're good. I was just saying that, the Kentucky game's where it all comes to a head for me with the Gamecocks offense and Marcus Satterfield and sort of my feelings. If he's even remotely going to be the answer for the long term. When you look at this football team, you look at this offense, it's hard. I mean, we knew going into Georgia, right? You're not going to find your identity and establish who you are. Like, that's the wrong team to do that against. But I think it's safe to say, like, if things do not improve, the chatter around Marcus Satterfield and his job status, it is only going to get louder and louder and louder and louder. And whether that's fair or unfair, you just can't be as porous as they've been offensively after adding all the pieces they've had and remain employed. It's just not possible.
Yeah, and that's where the tough part comes. And I think last year, that's where I guess my confidence kind of came into the year. It's like, okay, I think this could be a good marriage. This could be a good group. Because I thought there were, I would say, encouraging signs, just given that the talent that they did have on offense, which wasn't a lot. that, maybe the play calling could be pretty good this year, and put Spencer in a good situation. But, like we've been saying, we just really haven't seen that. So, I mean, it definitely is a pivotal stretch here. I mean, like you said, the next couple of games are against lesser competition, but this is about kind of building a base there into that pivotal game in Lexington. I mean, which is going to be, I think Kentucky's kind of had some issues as well, even though that they're a highly ranked program. There's some certain aspects that are kind of, I would say, suspect to me within that team. So I think it could present a pretty good, game for South Carolina. But, overall, the play calling, that scripted number that I mentioned, I mean, that's heavily influenced by the play calling. And I think, it's not always just the play caller, right? It's the whole group. But, again, you just look at the players that they have. It's, I don't know, kind of inexcusable to be at that kind of level. And I think they would admit that too. I mean, they're expecting to be near the top and they're at the very bottom. So, I mean, they have a pretty big hill to climb, but the opportunity's there over the next couple of weeks to get back.
Mm. I was just thinking about the third down calls from the game against Georgia Saturday. I mean, it's because it's so tough to look at that and say, well, if you don't score 30 against Georgia, like you're not making progress. But I think it just more so goes back to, and the announcers pointed this out. And Anthony, I'm sure, you probably went back and watched the game, I'm sure. And I would imagine you were scratching your head as well, where it's like first big pivotal third down of the game. I think the first third down of the game. And you take Spencer Rattler out and you put DeCarrion Joyner in at quarterback, a player who hadn't taken a snap all year. And it's just like that it's just hard to comprehend. Like, why did you even go get Rattler if that's what you were going to do,
Right. That's where I'm like,
you're overthinking it. Like, you're just overthinking it, I feel like, at that point.
Yeah, it's either overthinking or there's a lack of trust there. But it's, again, like we've just seen too much from him to know that he can play. It's just he's in a slump right now. And I think there's probably more to the story. There's a lot that we don't know. We will never know about how this is kind of unfolding and how it's being built. But yeah, that was one where it was like, I understand, when I say be creative, that's not what I'm talking about. Right. You get 7 on the field 24/7, but that's not what I'm talking about. When I'm talking be creative, that's just, it's bold. It's probably something you should do maybe this Saturday. I wouldn't fault him to it, but against, Georgia, the number 1 team in the country, yeah. I mean, it's just kind of something where you scratch your head and just kind of wonder that if are you overthinking it, or is there a lack of trust? I don't know.
Anthony, anyways, moving off of that game, because it's funny, we had against Steven Garcia every Monday on the show. He referenced back to 2008 when his Gamecock team got beat 56-6 in the Swamp by Tim Tebow and the Florida Gators. And, he talked about Coach Spurrier telling him, we didn't even watch that film. It just flush it, move on. There's nothing you can really take away. I feel like this Gamecocks football team sort of has to do the same thing. I mean, you got to, as quickly as possible, just forget the Georgia game ever happened, flush it, move on to Charlotte, because like you mentioned, there's a great opportunity against a Charlotte 49ers team that ranks dead last nationally in defense. Yards per game, points per game, I think they're either last or like 129th, something like that. Like you mentioned earlier, this should be a great opportunity for this Gamecocks offense to really get rolling in a big way. And like you mentioned, I released my best bet today. I'm taking South Carolina to cover the 22-point spread. I understand people are down on Carolina, and I'm not saying they're going to, use this game to go win 9 games somehow this year. But the way it was a mismatch between Georgia and South Carolina, it might be even more of a mismatch between the Gamecocks and the 49ers. Just talk about what you've seen from Charlotte, what the numbers say. And again, I think you and I would both agree this is a game that South Carolina should really be able to get some things rolling and flex their muscles early and often.
Yeah, and with Charlotte, I mean, they've always been, I would say a sneaky team. And this year, they've had to undergo some quarterback changes with Chris Reynolds being hurt. He's back now. But, I mean, when he was off the field, man, you pair that defense with that offense with no Chris Reynolds, I mean, and they probably are the worst team in college football. But he's back. I mean, he had a great game last week against Georgia State. Clean play all around. I mean, he is one of the most experienced quarterbacks at the group of 5 level. And he's just, I would say, the definition of consistent, right? He's never going to, I would say, flat out lose you the game. But, I don't know if he's ever going to go above and beyond like you did against Georgia State in his return last week. But like you said, those defensive numbers, I mean, I think they're the lowest graded coverage unit by 8 grading points in the country. So I think you look at that as a whole, and then you look at South Carolina and it's like, okay, you need to show something against this poor coverage unit, right? I mean, this is one of the worst in college football. This is your time to kind of take advantage of that. Yeah, I think Georgia State too. I mean, that was a good coverage unit. We broke down that game. That was their strength along with the run game, but they had some good defensive backs there. And of course, the last 2 weeks we knew what they were going to throw there with Arkansas and Georgia, very talented teams. But this is completely different. This is the opposite end of the spectrum. This is where the passing offense really does need to kind of take over and shine there. So, again, I don't think this is like the be all end all of the season, right? This is going to decide everything, but I mean, you're going to have to, I think you need to really kind of have yourself a day here offensively, right? I mean, I think you need to do whatever you can. I get the sportsmanship aspect of it, but if it becomes a blowout, you probably just need to keep the guys out there and just keep scoring, right? Just get them the reps, get them together, put some points on the board, and still some confidence in there, right? Because, again, this is a bad coverage team, a really bad defense overall. You have talent there offensively that hasn't been able to gel and kind of come together and mesh. This is your time to kind of get that. And, you look at some of the numbers from Rattler, and he's got more turnover-worthy plays than big-time throws, one of the lower big-time throw rates in college football. You still go back to what he's done in his career. He's got some of the highest big-time throw numbers in the country, one of the lowest negatively graded throw rates. The guy's there. It's just kind of getting more reps and opportunities. And I mentioned – a while back about, if they had the start that Michigan had with, Colorado State, Hawaii, UConn, don't mean for those schools to catch any strays here, but if they had that kind of start, I think we'd probably be talking differently about this team. And I think their confidence and the way they kind of play together would be different. It's just kind of been bad matches for them. So, and that's no excuse, right? That's never an excuse, but these next couple of games are the games where they can get back on their feet and know how to really play together offensively. So the opportunity is definitely there. And I think for the defense too, again, Charlotte's not full of talent, and Chris Reynolds is he is the offense to a certain extent. And so I think it could be I guess not so much a test for him, but just kind of a time for them to show, okay, this is an experienced, good college quarterback. Let's make him look bad as much as we possibly can. Right. I mean, that's kind of their chance there. So they're not facing a scrub there. So I think it's going to be a good thing for both sides of the ball for a game to kind of rebound and get back on their feet.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Anthony. It's crazy. You mentioned the offense, and I looked at these games over the summer and said, these will be great opportunities to the second half, let guys like Luke Doty and Tanner Bailey, Braden Davis, maybe even to Kerryon Joyner get under center and play. But I tend to agree with you. I mean, I think at this point, due to the fact that you've had such limited success offensively the first couple of weeks, I think you need to leave your starters in there a little bit longer than maybe you would have normally planned because, I mean, again, like you mentioned, man, like these are valuable in-game reps. And, this game is so mental and it comes back to confidence. And this is a team that I don't think I see playing with a whole lot of confidence right now. So you need to get your ones, as many positive reps as you possibly can. I'm not saying, leave Spencer Rattler out there until the final snap if you're up by 50 points, right? Because you don't want to risk injury, but I don't think this is a game where you say, well, if we can get 7 out by halftime. No, I think he needs to play. Like he needs to get these reps in there, not just this week, but next week as well. And I agree with you too. And I'm glad you brought it up because, I've noticed that we're just talking offense, but this defense, man, you've given up over 200 yards rushing in your first 3 games. It's got to be one of the worst defenses in college football. This is a great opportunity too, to get yourself off the shine. I mean, this team as a whole has been bad. It hadn't just been offense. It's been bad from all sides. And I think what's interesting about this too is that this Charlotte team just beat Georgia State over the weekend by a point, a team that the Gamecocks struggled with in week 1. So I guess you can take nothing for granted, but I'd agree with you that it's a big opportunity and one you need to seize and start to build some positive momentum and some positive feelings in Columbia. Anthony Treash of Pro Football Focus. Hey, man, appreciate you taking the time. It's always a pleasure. We'll definitely do it again next week.
Yeah, appreciate it. Enjoy it. And we'll probably have some positive conversations next time around.
Anthony, let's hope so, my friend.
Yes, sir.
Let's hope so. Appreciate you, brother. Take care.